Good evening and welcome to BUGAJSKI Hour. I'm happy to be back in Tirana again to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Albanians. Today I will be discussing important questions with a major national personality, and our guest today in the BUGAJSKI hot seat is the founder of Albania's Socialist Party, Fatos Nano. But first I will give you my overview of America's perspective on the world. What is Washington thinking? My subject today is the battle over missile defense. The long-standing dispute between Washington and Moscow over a European missile defense system has not been resolved. While the White House makes concessions to gain Russian cooperation on a range of security issues, the Kremlin views American backtracking as a weakness that can be exploited to Russia's advantage. US Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel has stated that plans to install long-range missile interceptors in Poland during the next decade as protection against a potential Iranian threat have been abandoned. Instead, because of the growing threat from a belligerent North Korea against America itself, the US intends to place additional interceptors in Alaska. America's missile defense plans for Europe initially involved a four-stage system, with shorter and medium-range interceptors to be deployed in the first three phases and longer-range interceptors in the now abandoned fourth phase. Moscow depicts the entire Europe-based missile defense system as a threat to Russia's strategic nuclear arsenal. It claims that it would enable the West to shoot down Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles and challenge the country's security. In reality, any American defense of Europe's new democracies is seen as unacceptable interference in Russia's zone of influence. Russian officials seek to eliminate missile defense altogether, or alternatively, they want to construct a joint system with NATO that would place Central Europe back under an unwanted Russian umbrella. Warsaw's principal objective is an American military presence on Polish territory that helps ensure the country's security and deters any future Russian threats. There is little faith in NATO's security guarantees without an American military footprint. Missile defense is the cornerstone of American-Polish military cooperation. Warsaw has enthusiastically accepted US requests for such a system ever since Poland joined NATO. US officials are reassuring Warsaw that the cancellation of the final missile defense stage will not make the country less secure, and the decision was not made to appease Russia. Unfortunately, abrupt changes in Washington's plans have cast doubts over long-range American intentions. Warsaw is well aware that at a time of increasing US budget cuts, Congress may ultimately oppose a multi-billion-dollar program that only defends Europe. It is time for the BUGAJSKI hot seat, and our special guest today is the founder and first leader of the Albanian Socialist Party, Fatos Nano, who also served as Albanian Prime Minister on 3 different occasions. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to share and talk with you about things of interest.
I'm sure it's going to be of interest not only to our Albanian audience, but international audience as well. So let me jump in with a question that I think many people are asking at this juncture, particularly with the elections coming up. Are you coming back actively into politics? What are your plans? What are your unfulfilled political aspirations?
Well, that's a good question that many bodies asking. And for certain, I have to be faithful to my political history and to my political family, which is the center-left community of voters and militants in Albania. But my political career is a very open and public expression of not simply a party politician. I've instigated in several cases continuously to create a standard and a tradition also in this fragile democratic society. Openness toward the opponents and toward the opposition. Participative initiatives that would make solutions rather non-partisan than partisan. Bipartisan initiatives and, for sure, of vital importance, controlled from the opposition of some important institutions of the state, such as Supreme Audit or parliamentary commissions that make possible that the government be more accountable and transparent in its action. According to this philosophy, I have to give an answer that starts from avoiding what will not happen. I won't be back in party politics.
You won't be?
I won't. Mm-hmm. So I won't be doing that crucial, relevant part of my career again. Because I'm convinced, I cannot give an example of my political philosophy, which was largely embraced and still appreciated by the public, to block in a stubborn way the refreshment of the political elites and the cohabitation among political generations in politics and in government. I will for sure continue being very active in non-partisan initiatives as a peacemaker, as a peacekeeper, as a Euro-Atlantic promoter of values and protector of modern standards that have shown effective in your societies.
So in terms of the election, general elections coming up, you won't be actively involved in the campaign?
In terms of participation to the race, not. For sure. And I use this opportunity to launch a political and public appeal to the voters of Albania. I'm very supportive, actually, of initiatives that, starting from elections, which are the crucial moment of every democracy, would help the Albanian society mature. That cannot happen without change. And in my understanding, and this is what I would ask to share with the public, change actually means not simply rotation of power. It means probably a dramatic change in the political agenda of the political class, a shift from petty, even if bourgeois actually, but provincial, local, Balkan more than European or Euro-Atlantic debates, to the global reality of ideas, of values and competitiveness. We should now, and this has to start with this plebiscitary vote for change, start dealing with the real challenges that our nation, our country, has to answer to, which is how to become competitive in the global economy, how to participate in our modest dimensions in the global movement of values, capitals, people, and especially initiatives that bring value added to the humanity. So I will support, even with non-campaigning individually, programs, initiatives, and leaders that have understood, have committed to make this change happen.
So would you say it's less important that there's a rotation and more important that there are new creative, imaginative policies that are pursued by the incoming administration? In other words, how important is the rotation? We have a democratic-led government. Is it important that there be a socialist-led government, or does it matter less than the policy?
Let me put it in more practical terms. When we embraced democracy more than 20 years ago, the main slogan that became inspirative of the right or the left, inspirative of changes of the philosophy of the society, of the political parties itself, was let's make Albania like Europe. And among the different experiences and the national friendships that were offered by, the various national friendships that were offered by EU countries, a distinct sympathy had the Spanish model of making peace and guaranteeing also specific rotations of power, of forces, of parties in power, even if they managed with maturity to survive after a very dramatic civil conflict, which is historically known. Now, the Spanish experience, the last example was given by the center-right leader Aznar, I hope everybody understands that probably 8 years in government is enough not to produce stagnation to the society, to the economy, to the credibility of politics in the eyes and minds of the citizen, and especially to help the society answer in a dynamic way politically to the renovation of electors and of the society itself. So new voters need especially new leaders.
understand. So how important would you say are these elections for Albania, Albania's credibility, but also Albania's progress as a democracy? And how can Albania ensure that the elections are, first of all, free and fair, legitimate, but also accepted by the majority of the population?
Right. That's still, unfortunately, a crucial question and issue that we should all deal with. Because what happens actually, because of a critical history of elections in this country, is grown, more sensitive, skepticism, if not incredibility of the public for the possibility that free and fair elections definitely will happen in Albania. This comes after a major assault to the institutions of free and fair elections that happened in 1996. And this process was not definitely hoped or stabilized, but by the opposite act that happened in 2005. When, I cannot be taciturn or not say again things that are crucial part of my political career. For the first time, nobody contested the elections. And this happened in a particular situation. When the government lost the elections. So we had definitely a pacific rotation of government. And what I'm saying means that between these two extremes, we should help Albania. We should help the Albanian voters. We should help this very dynamic society, which as an average is very young, reproduce faith and support to the most important institutions that makes your democratic societies work. I'm saying that because after 2005 there was again digression in elections, and there was again non-recognition of the electoral outcome, and unhappily boycott of the legitimate institutions that should govern the country for one legislator or more. So we have to not simply guarantee free and fair elections for Albania that is still waiting to engage in a contractual relationship for full membership in the EU, but we have to make that happen because it's high time that we mobilize our national potentials, political and non-political, our economic resources, our human capacities, nationally and regionally, using as a positive fact that there are more than half of the Albanians living not within our national borders, and happily they've been duly trained commonly by you and by the political elites of Albania and of the respective neighbor countries to serve as peacekeepers and peacemakers, to finalize the process of making this country not simply survive in history, but be competitive enough to guarantee reproduction of our potentials, of our values, and especially hope for the coming generations.
Well, let me ask you hypothetically, but also in sort of specific practical terms. What would you do differently if you were to serve again as Prime Minister? What specific policies do you think a new government should follow? I understand what you're saying in terms of Albanian new generation and so forth. What specifically, on day one, what would you do?
What I would focus upon as a major priority is the building, for sure, with the largest consensus possible, so in a non-partisan frame and audience, of a constitutional, of an economic constitution of the country. Which means we have to finally define and support consensually in a national scale, and to share with international partners an economic model that would identify the basic fields of interest, the basic competitive values and capacities that Albania can offer to the international division of labor and to the open economy globally. And we have to finalize and complete the missing reforms yet that would help the whole society, starting from education, with the standards of global competitiveness and values of the young generations, of the new active workers that enter each year the labor market, and of the coming economic actors and factors that will serve as partners for the global entrepreneurs and foreign investors that would share and find in Albania more clearly an interest for economic initiatives. For instance, we could try inviting the political class, not simply working together for defining these economic constitutions of the country for the future, but building also a constitutional and institutional frame to support it be effective. There are interesting initiatives in the neighborhood, if not mostly in the global economy, that non-partisan, finalizing institutions give the final verdict or give the final go to the most crucial solutions that one nation, a country needs. Say, the national control of the urban territory to avoid just devastating private and fragmentized initiatives that destroy it, and so on and so forth. So, in my understanding, the political class, working closely with the other groups and factors of interest, that for sure have to have a say in the Albanian development, should help the country focus on three main sectors of work and reproduction, which would be tourism, manufacture, and what should I say, organic food production. These are the most competitive capacities that Albania has in order to offer and participate in the global sharing of values and profits. To put it simply, we could help this part of Southern Europe integrate and grow faster if the tourism integrated with entertainment industries and services would be allowed to triple, according to some very serious expertise studies, the GDP by producing 60% of this growth. Second, manufacture, assembling, training of the active working force in that purpose could be contributive to the tripling of the GDP for more than 25%. And the final 15% would be if we focus and make possible that the fantastic resources that are offered to Albania by God and by its geostrategic position be integrated in the global demand for organic food and for ecological initiatives.
We will break now for a few adverts. Let me jump in and ask you about, in terms of programs, let me ask you about socialism. What is European socialism now? I mean, particularly for our American viewers, but also for Albanians. One often hears criticisms now with the European financial crisis that neoliberalism has been a failed ideology. But I remember from further back a few years ago, socialism, maybe of a different variety, was also a failure, but an even more dismal failure, I would say. Where is European socialism stand now? How distinct is it from the center-right, from conservatism, from neoliberalism? What distinguishes socialism?
Well, in my understanding, we cannot waste time anymore by trying to search or restructure the classic doctrines and models of ideological debates, so between the left and the right, between socialism and capitalism as systems. Because since Bill Clinton and Tony Blair joined each other and launched an international appeal for solidarity, for a third way, I think many things have changed in that direction. Now, in terms of socio-economic systems, for certain, socialism was dead last century. I'll open a parenthesis because we still need to understand better and to engage into serious discussions upon the Chinese model. And according to its dimensions, the advantages and disadvantages of what China is showing to the rest 5 or 6, I say 80% of the population of the world.
Although Chinese economy is also undergoing stress and there will be social problems ahead.
But if you refer strictly and to the official qualification of China, what you find is one state, two systems. Now, for certain socialism and the respective ideas experiences and doctrine have helped a lot the human society to improve. Specifically in terms of social solidarity, social justice, and a more comprehensive role of the state into public management and harmonization of the various interests, or globally between South and North, so industrialized and developing nations, to see that also the center-right or former classical capitalistic doctrine, formulas, solutions, moderate and embrace ideas that go in the direction of a mixed model, of an integrative approach of traditional problems. Now, for certain, there is a crisis of identity in both camps, locally and globally, especially in Europe. Which means, even if, because of the actual recession or crisis, looks like the ideas and the initiatives of the third way have lost ground or sensitivity among the global public, I believe this is the way to go. I believe that with non-partisan solutions, nationally and internationally, I believe that with whole participative initiatives among nations and clubs of nations, different regional organizations, from BRISC, if you like, to EU, and happily there is no better model than the largest market in the world, which is yours, the United States federal system and reality. So I believe this is one of the most important messages that can help and serve also Albania and the Albanians grow. Of the famous or classic axiomatic saying, we all have to think globally and act locally. Acting locally while thinking globally in Albania means probably we have also to initiate a final improvement of our constitutional frame to make possible that this still critical and conflictual situation of check and balanced powers be finally given an answer through the creation of a Senate.
A Senate?
Of a Senate.
An upper house, basically.
An upper house, which is probably one of the components of Euro-Atlantic models that we still didn't embrace or didn't manage to digest till now. My philosophy has been based on the following. Young democracies, including Albanian factors, are not allowed to invent. So every initiative that, because of critical or crisis situations, because of local conflicts or the challenges like elections, would bring the global actors that you have identified and supported as partners in the region and in Albania, move behind, move back, digress towards nationalism.
I was going to come to this question actually in a moment, but sticking to the political changes or constitutional changes, so you would support the creation of an upper house.
Yeah.
What about presidential elections? Would you say they should be direct elections instead of indirect?
In this optic, yes. My answer is definitely yes. Because we need more authoritative institutions that have a constitutional protection also, to move from the traditional party conflictuality that periodically brings Albania to stalemates. Happily, the last one was not very dramatic, even if its consequences are severe. But it was not and cannot be anymore like what happened in '97 or by the end of the coming year, '98, which was also a military. For sure, there were dramatic events on January of last year, but they didn't degrade into this severe crisis of the past. Now, we have to help the country and the society move to a different stage. Help governments that are elected legitimately through free and fair elections run the everyday business of the nation, but help the most crucial and future-oriented strategic solutions that the country needs be implemented, introduced by both sides, by all active factors and groups of interest that can contribute.
Right. Well, as you know, one of the criticisms of Albania is the extremely polarized political situation, which often results in gridlock and stalemate and infighting and focus, let's say, on sometimes personality battles rather than national interests, Albania's national interests. Will Albania develop into a multi-party system, or is it beginning to? Do you see that on the horizon, and how long will it take?
Well, for certain we have our experience made in more than 20 years now with this multi-party system, which is, as you said, unhappily characterized mostly by high conflictuality and polarization. What we need, what we really and vitally have to support as crucial for the country, is a real change from the actual philosophy of political competitions, which is based on the more Byzantine or Balkanized idea.
Balkanized in a negative sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Idea that you have to liquidate the enemy or the opponent or the opposition, and the winner takes it all. To a win-win philosophy that has shown that is the most non-competible idea and formula of dynamic progress in the modern societies. Now, I'm not happy that several initiatives that my political community, me personally, took in an important part of this political history in democracy of Albania had not a future, were blocked, and there were serious setbacks, such as, for instance, the control of the opposition in institutions that really have to make the government more accountable, like Supreme Audit, or the building of bipartisan initiatives, staffs and administrations that would work in parallel with the routine management of the government agenda for strategic solutions and issues that the nation needs. The question is the Albanian politics and society mature enough to see that happen? Definitely yes. That's why, through elections, we need to make possible a real and serious change that would marginalize the Falklands. The now publicly known, if not negatively famous, names and politicians and policies of conflictuality and polarization.
So presumably it's important for young people to get involved in politics at local level, at regional level, national level, in order for there to be, let's say, a turnaround, a generational turnaround in politics, because that's very important for emerging democracies.
Yes, it is, but it has to be dealt with and managed in a very serious way. So it has to be institutionalized. It has to be protected by the necessary standards and democratic models that first of all should be embraced by the political parties. What I'm saying refers to what I tried to do, and unfortunately there was a digression after also in this aspect, with the Socialist Party in the period of 10 years that we managed to radically transform the former communist left in Albania into a modern one that was quite naturally accepted as member of the Socialist International. Like statutory norms that impeded the concentration of authority and mandates of power into few hands. Second, regulatory practices and norms that made the leaders, even if democratically elected, more vulnerable toward the electors and more accountable as a consequence. I'm afraid that the most recent change in the constitution of the country, and especially the electoral system that followed it, which is actually in force, did not help Albania in this optic and are not helping the integration of young generation, young activists, and young minds and capacities in politics. Because the system is closed towards newcomers. You have to be highly, and there is no different model, unhappily, organized to compete with the existing military, if not militant only, camps that dominate the scene. You have to spend probably a fortune to have access into a political market that reproduces corruption in the country. Corruption in Albania, or in fragile or hybrid democratic system yet, starts from the political parties. What is the first letter of fight against corruption, definitely, is transparency of the financements that help the parties get control of power or block each other and the country as a consequence. Now, the people know how degrading and devastating are these things and phenomena. The people know better and are more responsible than who is still running this system, that what is creating and reproducing stalemating situations in Albania is the informality and the non-legal. So on the brinks of legality, I'm still not saying illegal because it has to find a judicial answer, links between politics and business, and for sure organized crime. So what we need is help and make use of the new generations, give a different answer and solution to the existing reality. It cannot be done without them. It cannot be done in harming them, because we will continue harming the future of the society and of the Albanian nation.
Let me turn now to foreign policy, foreign affairs. I'd like to get your perspective on our current state of Albanian foreign policy. In particular, you hinted at this earlier, the nationalist rhetoric that seems to be creeping into the political debate during the beginning of the election campaign here, and then the criticism from outside in terms of the nationalist rhetoric within Albania. What is your view of this development?
Well, we should for sure be aware enough if some traditional diseases reappear in this still critical region of the world. But we should not exaggerate. For certain, there is a more enhanced tone of nationalism in different Balkan countries now, even if paradoxically they are competing, and they should not stop competing for Euro-Atlantic integration, which is the opposite exactly of exercising absolute national sovereignty within national borders. But let me try to find a satisfactory, if not reasonable and more incentivating answer to what's happening. Let me consider that the nationalistic tones that have reappeared in different Albanian countries are consequences of the crisis, or of the incapacity of certain political elites that control governments actually to tackle with the most serious challenges of integration and competitivity towards global reality.
So this is a deflection, you would say, from...
Exactly. But I'm convinced it has no future. Albania is, and the Albanians are one of the more to be trusted and produce support in the optic of building cohabitation and supporting and developing Euro-Atlantic initiatives and integration for the region. It's an advantage that should not be lost, and it was for certain produced by the local political elites under international sponsorship and monitoring, that all the Albanian communities that live in the region are the strongest Euro-Atlantic supporters that you find globally. Even if they still don't understand, and should be hoped to put an end to that, that integrating fully the global economy, starting from European Union, means pay more costs than staying out. Means getting competitive, to make profits and to produce value added, not in a grand way, but by sharing entrepreneurship. And Albanians are among the best entrepreneurs, and this country is surviving economically, especially from their entrepreneurial spirit. But what we need actually is standard rule of order.
We will break now for a few adverts. Well, going back to the national question, particularly in the region, one hears, and I hear increasingly this talk of unification between Albania and Kosovo. Then you hear the critics of this position, that this would destabilize the region, this would raise nationalism in several countries. What is your view? Which way should the two countries go?
Well, let me again reiterate that we're not allowed to invent. And the easiest, but not the most efficient solutions would be try to identify doctrines or instruments that would give a different answer from what is certainly identified, especially in this part of the world, as social injustice towards nations. I mean, the factors and the realities that did not help Albanians live in one state are definitely recognized. But the answer to that is not one nation state, well armed and vertically controlled, so not without much democracy, that would bring that back if this sort of militarized state or stable state administration was lacking when it happened at the beginning of last century. So at the eve of our independence. Now, if we have to adopt a viable, working, and definitely not exhausted yet, model of solution to national interest in the era of globalism, we have probably to engage into the discussion, what's the model, say, of the EU that probably, especially in this crisis situation, has to serve as a reference for the future and as an outcome from the crisis. Is it what probably happened till now, but which was not the idea of the founders, or the founding fathers of the European integration? A skyscraper of all nations occupying one floor and vertically controlled by a multinational authority, or the model of a pagoda community coming from your reality, to my understanding, where everybody could live in his home and garden with no fences and borders with the neighbors. So the final solution that would put an end to the threats of nationalism also in this critical part of the world would be a more harmonized and globally compatible model between the federal state and the national authorities.
You mean within the EU?
Exactly.
Particularly. Well, is Albania ready to join the EU? These conditions still have to be met in order to get candidacy
Practically, not only potentially, the answer is yes, in my opinion. There, for certain, needs to be completed some final reforms and stages that would make this not be simply better understood by Europe itself or the international community, but also better digested by Albanians and Albanian factors. Everything has to start from politics, because politics is producing the stalemates and the delays in the process of a contractual relationship definitely needed between Albania and the EU. But in order to help politics move from that critical position that is blocking the process, then I have to come back to what I said, what is necessary for the country. Build in a non-partisan way and work bipartisanly to implement it, an agenda of integration that would not make anymore the crucial reforms still missing, that the country needs to finalize its the recognition of its capacity for cohabitation and integration into the EU to happen. So we for certain have potentials. We for certain have experience. We for certain have traditions. We have to find a different model of integrating what we possess in order to survive as one of the nations of the European Union. To be competitive,
right,
and to be offering values, not simply receiving. The same process, substantially, that helped Albania integrate NATO from a country that was consuming security to a country that is contributing to global security, actually.
Well, the other side of that question, I suppose, is the EU worth joining at this particular point? I mean, how do you see the development of the EU? We have a financial crisis, we have increasingly, I would say, even a political crisis. Increasingly, there are divisions between Northern Europe and Southern Europe, and Northwestern Europe and Southern Europe, with the East Europeans somewhere in the middle. We see this deep crisis recently, both in Greece and in Cyprus, not to mention other economies in Southern Europe. Is the EU, how do you see the future of the EU? By the time Albania is ready to join, what sort of an EU will we have?
That's a good question. I have to be probably more practical in some aspects. I asked some years ago the Norwegian Prime Minister, which is
outside the EU,
representing a reality under national sensitivity in Europe, still not joining the Union. And it was immediately after the Norwegians voted again in a referendum way no. And I'd asked him, what will happen? What's the future of the relations between your country and the EU? He said, please, we have first to find an answer. Which Europe will you join? For certain, the critical realities that the EU is living through actually have created a sort of a lot of debates that seem to block or even to create threats for a setback in the process of cohabitation and in the institutional frame of running a large community of nations in this way that is known. But I don't think that there could be a different model besides completing what has already been achieved. For certain, the actual debates, because there is always a more motivating situation for all actors when a crisis is present to find a solution, will help find more quick and more integrative answers to the challenges that the European Union has faced while growing, to the problems that actually some nations are facing, to the debates among the rich or the north and the poor or non-developed countries of the south of the European Union. For certain, we have to still identify who can really be the globally non-contested in Europe inheritor of the founding fathers. There is for certain a renewal of the political elites. There is for certain some transition and skepticism among voters to identify the new leaders as having the same inspiration or charisma of the founding fathers. This probably will be dominating this transition to the aftermath of this crisis. But my opinion, my conviction is that there cannot be setback for the European Union, but completing the process that would make it really competitive and compatible with larger markets and international organizations and states like the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned NATO. Let me ask you a question about the future of NATO. Some say, and there is some evidence, that after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, NATO is going to play less of a role in terms of US policy, in terms of security questions, that the transatlantic relationship itself is less important for America than this veering towards a pivot towards the Pacific, Southeast Asia, Middle East and so forth. How do you see the future of NATO, particularly at a time where European security could be challenged in the years ahead, given the, let's say, the frictions and potential conflicts even within the European Union or on the mainland of Europe, let's say? What is the future of NATO? Your governments, of course, spent an inordinate amount of time trying to get into NATO and were eventually successful for Albania in entering NATO. And Albania has made a massive contribution, I think, in terms of its capabilities to the NATO missions. What is the future of NATO?
Well, you, in a very practical way, are inviting everybody to engage into the discussion and debates for necessity of reform, restructuring, and for certain survival of some of the international, even if partial, institutions that were built and operated during the Cold War. So this is a very reasonable discussion. And I don't think that NATO itself has frozen and is acting like a former Cold War multilateral organization. For certain, there are new threats to the global community of people, starting from challenges of regional organizations between not simply in the framework of relations between Europe and Asia, but globally thinking between emerging new global powers and traditional, stable or not, ones. For certain, there is this threat of international terrorism that sees no national enemies, but is a global threat to all. So I believe that the ongoing processes of dialogue within NATO, between NATO and other security producing organizations and countries, like Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, but now
Russian Federation.
So I probably was very easy to go back to Soviet Union because there seems to be a shift or a trend to shift back to a sort of in practical of an international behavior of former Soviet Union.
The Eurasia Union, as they call it now.
So I believe the ongoing processes of dialogue and common initiatives to find more viable partnership between the different organizations that fight for global challenges or threats against will find the final answer. It's not that easy, for sure. But this doesn't mean that we should easily move towards dissolution of what has shown effective till now.
Sure. Well, let me ask you a final question. We've come to the end of the hour. Let me ask you a final question. Going back to your personal ambitions or aspirations, the one position that you have not served is as Albanian president. Do you still have such aspirations? And as the saying goes, will that make you or allow you to die happy?
But God allowing, the answer is yes. I mean, even it has not still been formal or formalized, I still think and feel vital because of a very large public sympathy, which definitely, in the eyes of many, seems to be a necessity for an effective head of state to exercise his power. If it will continue being like it was till now, a party solution, one of the members of the majority administration or some non-identifiable individual that would find a tacit support by both camps because it's inefficient, that has no future. So, running or not, winning or not, I will continue serving with that philosophy.
Fatos Nano, thank you very much for joining me on BUGAJSKI Hour.
It was my advantage.
And I'm sure we'll have you back at some point in the not too distant future. Thank you again. My second commentary today on an important European topic is Germany's growing euroscepticism. One of the key objectives in building European institutions following World War II was to subdue German nationalism. But in the midst of Europe's financial crisis and economic slowdown, German society may be turning against the EU project. German euroscepticism has been restricted by the decades-long taboo on post-Nazi nationalism. But the public mood is now shifting. An opinion poll recently conducted by the ZDF television network indicates that 65% of Germans think the euro currency damages the country, and 49% think that Germany would be better off outside the European Union altogether. With general elections due in September, 1 in 4 Germans are willing to vote for a party that wants to quit the euro as anger with the costs of the euro crisis escalates. Another poll conducted for the weekly Focus magazine indicates that 26% of citizens may back a party that takes Germany out of the euro. And indeed, a new movement, styled as the Alternative for Germany, is holding its founding convention in Berlin this month. According to the Alternative, quote, "The Federal Republic is in the deepest crisis in its history. The introduction of the euro was a fatal mistake that is threatening our prosperity," unquote. The movement proposes German withdrawal from the euro and the return to the Deutschmark, or the creation of a separate currency with financially stable European economies. Germany's mainstream parties remain overwhelmingly pro-euro, despite internal protests over bailouts for Southern Europe. Chancellor Angela Merkel has tried to reassure her voting base by insisting that heavily indebted countries must impose harsh austerity measures and pay back their debts. The Social Democrats and Greens have backed Merkel's approach in dealing with Europe's financial problems. But the Alternative is waiting for a significant boost if a new crisis materializes. According to the Alternative, whether countries can and will pay back their debts is dependent on the unpredictable voting choices of their citizens. To counter rising disaffection, Merkel will need to be tougher with Southern Europeans and appease skeptical German voters before the September elections. While anti-Germanism is rising in financially unstable EU member states, anti-European sentiments are beginning to stir in Germany. Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of the show. I have greatly enjoyed being with you and my colleagues here at Albanian Screen. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. And see you all very soon. Miro Pafshim.